Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with two friends who apparently subscribe to Netflix. First, he's going to stick to the plan. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
The kids, they're cute, but they're not quite sexy enough. I'm good, Jen. How are you?
A little worse now that's what you led with. That's good. I really hope people stick around so that gets put in context later. And he doesn't think we have enough hot dogs. It's Antonio Alifano. How's it going, Antonio?
Peace is sitting on a lake in the summertime. Peace is a Coca-Cola on a hot summer day. Peace is being with you. The assignment was, what is peace? I'm great. I'm amazing.
Oh, that was great. It really is that last part that kicks it into a whole other gear where she feels the need to say what the assignment is.
It's amazing. It's so funny.
So if you're wondering what we're talking about, the question of the day is, what happens when a hired assassin, a long-distance swimmer, and an actress researching her next role walk into a bar? We're going to try to answer that question because we're going to be reviewing not one, but three films now available to stream on Netflix. So the first is David Fincher's The Killer. The second is Nyad, which is directed by Vasarhelyi, I think is actually how you pronounce it. I did look it up. And Jimmy Chin. And so if you recognize their names, they're actually more known for the documentaries such as Free Solo, which they won an Oscar for the year that it came out, I believe. And the most recent release we're going to talk about is Todd Haynes' May December, which PT and Antonio both chose their opening quotes from. So that gives you a flavor at all. You know what you're in for, or maybe you don't. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen these films. And with a very clear warning, you could say as dramatic as a musical refrain from one of these films, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. And we are going to lump them all together. So once we do spoiler mode, it'll be like a free-for-all with all three movies. So just so you know, I felt like it would just be too constraining because we wouldn't be able to kind of talk to them about them together if we wanted to in spoiler mode if we segmented it. PT, if folks want to know where they can hear more, if they like what we're talking about today, what can they do?
Yeah, if you've looked past my introductory quote and you want to keep listening to us, you can follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. The feed is hosted on Jen's Substack, thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your content. And you can also check us out on Instagram and Threads at the Long Take Review for updates on new episodes.
Thanks, PT. We are just about ready to get into our Netflixaganza, but first, we need to do a quick movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
I can't tell if that's weirder because Greg's not here. It might be.
But it's also great because Antonio, I don't think, had heard it live before.
Oh, that's true, because you're not on social media, so you wouldn't have even seen me post that when I made it originally. Thanks, Greg, for lending your voice to move our movie news bumper.
Yes.
So I had a bunch of news things in here, but I see someone else very correctly updated it, and in our Google Doc, SAG-AFTRA, it's official. We pretty much knew that the strike was over, but now it is official. The contract has been approved, ratified, I think is the official word, correct?
Yes. 78+% voted in favor of it. I think the 21 and 2/3 percent there was that pushback about some of the AI clauses they thought were maybe not going far enough, but the vast majority agreed that this was the right deal for now, and it's ratified, and when the strike had ended, but now the sort of the labor dispute is over, contracts are in place, and everything is back up and running, which is great for us consumers of content, but also great for the people who work in these unions, that they're getting paid more and getting more compensation that they deserve.
Absolutely. We also have a little bit of awards news. So, we're in awards season. awards are going to be nominated and given out left and right between now and when the Oscars are in the spring. So the National Board of Review actually gave out their awards. It was quite a big list. And then I think Indie Spirits Awards gave out their nominations or released their nominations. So anyone have any thoughts about, what surprised you or what trends kind of stood out from either of these awards bodies? And like in terms of projecting for the Oscar race or changing the Oscar race?
I mean, I think what's most surprising is that there's not that many surprises, actually, right? Like, it's a lot of the same titles and people. Killers of the Flower Moon taking Best Picture, just like they did in New York. I love The Holdovers, and Past Lives getting a little something, and same thing for Anatomy of a Fall getting another award. So all of this is really great. I also find fascinating like the lists, right? Like the list of like the top 10 movies, because those inevitably have things that I haven't seen and that weren't on my radar. So I don't know. I just assumed Ferrari was going to be bad, and now I have to grapple with maybe it being good and maybe needing to go see it. So
I don't know if I go that far. I mean, I haven't seen it, so I can't say. But based on what I've heard about it, it might be this is we really like scenes with cars. Because that's the thing I have heard is that the sort of execution of the car races is amazing, but that the actual like story wise that the movie maybe doesn't hold together as well. So it might be that people are just like really pushing it for that, and apparently everyone loves Penelope Cruz in it. So it could just be that
that's not surprising. That part's
willing to yes, Oscar darling Penelope Cruz. So,
and I'm sure Adam Driver is also a positive for a lot of people who watch it. Yeah, the thing that really stood out to me is how strong the field is, because again, Ferrari was sort of like, oh, okay, we're going with Ferrari, but otherwise it was just like you look at the list and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. This all sort of checks out. Again, the Iron Claw is one that has been kind of bubbling, and you're like, I wouldn't necessarily have predicted it, but I wasn't surprised to see it there. But then you take a beat and you're like, oh, well, American Fiction's not on this list. The Color Purple's not on this list.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are other movies that are presumed not front runners, but presumed, viable candidates for best, one of the 10 Best Picture slots and other awards. So, pretty strong year that there's no sort of, maybe it's because there's no like villain yet, or there's no sort of scramble to fill all these places. But yeah, I mean, I liked the Killers of the Flower Moon love from the critics as well. I also liked looking down at the independent films. We had our fave theater camp show up on the NBR list, as well as 1001, which is a great little small movie that kind of came and went. That was a Sundance movie.
And I think Noah Galvin got an Indie Spirit nom. I think his name popped up somewhere when I was looking at these.
That's right.
So I was really pleasantly surprised by that. I'm like, oh, because
best supporting performance for an Indie Spirit Award, because they have removed the gender distinctions, which is good. I think that's good. Even though there's part of me that's like, but the history, the trajectory of time, where for best actor and supporting actor versus actress and supporting actress, but in a societal sense, probably good to just put them all together and not worry about the gender distinctions.
Yeah, I think listening to the buzz from critics, it seems like Killers of the Flower Moon stock up in general, because people were sort of talking about how maybe that was, is this going to go the way of The Irishman? And now I feel like people aren't as ready to say that. Granted, we have like the series of awards bodies we've heard from so far do skew, like NBR I looked up is actually New York based, even though it's national. So that there could be a little bit of bias in there as well. But the one thing a couple of concerns that I heard were that May Decembr apparently did really well at the Indie Spirit Awards. It got like 5 or 7. That's like something upwards of 5 or 7 nominations, but that Julianne Moore did not get nominated. So that's a little concerning. People were like, wait a minute, isn't she like a good part of that movie? Like, what are we doing? And then people are really kind of split on what this means so far for All of Us Strangers, which is a movie I'm really excited to see. Yeah. But it's like people are kind of like, some people are saying, oh, these nominations and awards so far like indicate it might be big coming up, but then others are like, no, it needs to be, would have needed to do better by now or something like that. So yeah, it's interesting how different narratives kind of come out of it. But I think Killers of the Flower Moon, consistent winner. Also, I think Paul Giamatti missed something in these awards. And people, even though the holdovers got some stuff, and so people are also like, is he going to miss Best Actor? Like, that would be tragic. So,
but that also might be, both of those sort of Julianne Moore and Paul Giamatti might be because of the sort of conglomeration of
right, that's true.
Of just lead performance and supporting performance. So, Charles Melton did get supporting performance for May Decembr, and Julianne Moore would have also been in the same category.
Right. That is
so, and there are movies that have multiple nominations there. Eileen and American Fiction both have two nominees in supporting performance. So it's not impossible, but maybe it just shows, at least in the indies, there was more. They were like, oh, let's put it towards the newer person than Julianne Moore.
This sort of happens every year, but the thing, I just kind of want to be, after Indie Spirit Awards in particular, I kind of want to be like, cool your jets, everybody, because there are usually a couple films that people are like, well, this is now in the race. And then it's like, well, I mean, they are the Indie Spirit Awards. like they're one of the, in theory, they should be one of the least indicators of, the softest indicators of the Oscars. But I think a lot of people were like, oh, hey, maybe Passages could get in. A movie that I have not seen yet, despite Greg being like, it's on Mubi, you can go watch it now, and I just haven't gotten to it yet. So I think Passages, and then I feel like there was one other film people.
Well, Eileen had a big,
and Passages. People are now like, oh maybe, and I'm like, let's wait a little longer. Let's see like how Golden Globesy the Golden Globes are on Monday, and to kind of counterbalance what we have right now. So because I think those nominations come out on Monday. So
the only other thing I'll add is, I saw some commenters saying Lily Gladstone just tape to tape march to Best Actress because she took the award from NBR, which again, maybe that's Scorsese bias, New York skewed, but there was a lot of talk for a while about like, oh, Emma Stone is so good in Poor Things, is that going to be viable? Even Natalie Portman maybe for May Decembr, one of the movies we'll talk about today. But I think Lily Gladstone's really strong, and it seems like she has a lot of momentum, even more so than Killers of the Flower Moon does.
She might be one of those that contenders that just steamrolls from now until the Oscars. Like it's like a sort of like a Troy Kotsur or a Ke Huy Quan, except she's in lead. I've heard a lot of critics sort of like really complimenting Killers of the Flower Moon's campaign, because like they're like, well, they put her in lead, so they put the focus on her, and now she's the front runner, and like it sounds like Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro just throwing all of their star power to like sort of project onto her and be like, no, look at her, don't look at us, look at her. And so I feel like it just seems like it's working out so far. So they know what they're doing. In other news, in terms of upcoming stuff, I mean, Godzilla -1 just came out. People really love it. Now I'm like, why did I sleep on this? I should have gone to go see it.
I have my ticket for Monday. I'm excited to see it.
Awesome. And then Wonka apparently is good.
If you see Godzilla -0 emergency pod next week, we can make it happen.
Okay. All right.
Sound the monster raid sirens.
I'm only laughing because like I feel like emergency pods should be reserved for like breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. Godzilla's awesome. Like that's the news. Okay,
all right. Sure. Now I feel like we're gonna have to do that just to complete with it. So people are really excited about that, which I feel like I wasn't expecting. I didn't have that on my radar necessarily. I'm not opposed to Godzilla movies. I enjoy them, but like I didn't have that on my radar as being really good. And then Wonka, early reviews for that. Apparently everyone loves Wonka. And I want to officially apologize for saying there's something wrong about this movie. I don't know what it is, but something doesn't seem right. Apparently everything's wrong.
That's the trailer. That was so but I'm happy that it's I'll maybe watch it with my kids. We'll see.
I will not apologize. I will not apologize for thinking it looked bad, because I still think it looks bad, but I'm glad to hear people are saying it's good. That was the sort of, and I feel bad I forget his name. It's King, I think, Paul King, the writer director of Paddington movies, who did this. It's like,
yeah,
great. I don't have kids.
You were
maybe
the
I'll watch it with
one
Antonio's kids.
If I remember, you were the one, PT, who was trying to talk me down from my skepticism, because you're like, but Paddington movies are good.
I was just saying that's the reason to believe. I didn't believe. I wasn't trying to convince you. I was just saying there was a window. There's a window of opportunity where it could be good. It's still so hard to believe, like, just from what we've seen. But
I don't know. Apparently people like it. It sounds like it's because the trailers don't indicate that it's a musical at all.
Yeah.
But apparently that's the thing that people really love about it. It sounds like is the musical parts, like the song and the dance and the whole spectacle of it. So, maybe that's why there's such a what's the word? Not cavern. What am I thinking? Like a
chasm?
It's not. Yeah. Why did it take me so long to think that? It's the end of the semester, folks. I've run out of brain power. I've been grading all day.
B+.
I have nothing left.
B+.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we'll have to see which of the three movies we're going to talk about. We'll maybe get a B+ from us at this point in the semester. I think we're ready to talk about these Netflix movies. So we want to start with the short take. So these are general impressions of the film. But since we have 3 today, I figured we just rotate and like have each of us sort of take the lead on each of these and kind of rotate through them. And so each person can do. We'll do one film and then 1, 2, 3 each of our short takes, and then go to the next film. I think that's how we'll do it. I managed to confuse myself with my notes. I was like, wait, how are we doing this? So we'll start with. I did put these in reverse release order. So most recent to been out the longest, per PT's advice. And so we're going to start with May Decembr, and we're going to start with Antonio. So Antonio, what was your short take on May Decembr? How'd you like it?
So I really enjoyed it a lot. So May Decembr is about an actress investigating a decades-long romance that started between a 36-year-old and a 7th grader, as the actress prepares to play the former in a film. And I found the movie to be just lush and surprisingly funny, with 3 excellent central performances. So there's like the Lifetime version of this movie, which probably Lifetime did have a version of this movie that focuses on the affair. And that's the film the actress is actually making. But we're talking about Todd Haynes, who's one of my favorite directors. So of course, it's much more interesting to imagine what the story of these people and their family would be over time. And so I had very high expectations for it, and they were more than met. So I highly recommend this one. What do you all think?
I also really enjoyed this. I feel like it took me a minute after it finished to sort of process it. Like I sort of sat there being like, wow, but what did I just watch? Like, what? But then it didn't take too long where I was like, oh, okay, I'm picking but it was one of those films that I really wish I had someone to talk to about it right afterwards, to be like, okay, so like what, and so yeah, it was good that we're doing this today, because I'm basically going to be doing that, just very delayed. And I feel like the performances in this are amazing. I feel like there's some very layered acting happening, especially Natalie Portman. I feel like, that we'll talk about. I have a question later in spoiler mode about which performance was our favorite, but like, I feel like Natalie Portman probably had the hardest job, because she's not only she has to play an actress. She is an actress playing an actress, trying to do research for a role, and then she has to kind of like, but she has to be an actress of different skill level potentially, or just like of a different type than she actually is. And so it's like, it was really interesting to kind of see her go into different registers at different times throughout the movie. But yeah, I love the music in this. I love the melodrama. And I feel like it was very clever about using certain kind of stylistic tropes or genre, like threads of different genres, to sort of like build in commentary about telling the story. And I feel like this is probably the only way to tell this kind of story well.
Yeah.
And we can get more into that in spoiler mode. But PT, what did you think about May Decembr?
Yeah, I also love this movie. I'm close to just saying masterpiece. Like, I think it's just exceptional. It's up in my upper echelon of the year. I thought it was really good. I was like laughing and cackling along for like a lot of the movie, but also like felt moved at a lot of times about like the sort of, for especially particular characters, for like what had happened to them, and the lives that they were living, and the sort of cages they had constructed for themselves. And yeah, I mean, I think everything that both of you said is very true. The two things I'll add is I think that it is particularly good at skewering storytelling, but particularly cinematic storytelling and acting, and how we kind of construct these narratives that we tell each other, and in addition to the stories we tell ourselves to live our lives. But yeah, everything about sort of acting and the production around acting and the fame around it that is in this movie was delicious to me. And yeah, I think that it's one of those things where it's hard, and I made a bold choice leading with the quote I did, but it's hard to sort of say this is a funny and insightful movie about a woman who was a pedophile with a young boy who then she's still with, like some famous tabloid people in real life, and that I think that's a hard sell. But I think if you can get past that, this does a really good job of showing the sort of long-term damage that people do to each other in what they think is a noble pursuit, or a pursuit of pure goals that are obviously not particularly pure.
Is this your favorite Todd Haynes movie now, PT?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I have a lot of blind spots with Todd Haynes. The only one I'm certain I have seen all the way through is Velvet Goldmine, which I also love. But I do, so in that sense, like, I like this a little more than Velvet Goldmine. But yeah, I mean, it's bad. I'm very, I'm a bad moviegoer, but I've wanted to see, and I had always sort of intended to see the other sort of major movies in between, plus Safe, which was technically before Velvet Goldmine, but just I've somehow missed it. So I can't really answer that beyond that long unanswered.
Far from Heaven is my favorite of his.
Yeah.
Still,
that's the only one I've seen.
Oh, you haven't seen? Oh, he was Carol.
I have not seen that. Yeah.
He's Far From Heaven, I'm Not There, Carol, Wonderstruck, Dark Waters. And then a movie called The Velvet Underground, which is a documentary about the Velvet Underground.
Okay. But is different than Velvet Goldmine, which is what you just said.
Correct. That's like a glam rock story, sort of about Bowie and Iggy Pop, but a fictionalized version of that.
The other thing I want to add to about this is that I think I had not low expectations, but I wasn't as excited to see this one because of the premise, right? The type of story I knew it would be telling. And I was just kind of like, I don't know if I need that. I don't know if I need this story in my life. But I have to say it was so well done and sort of handled with such complexity, but while also making it morally very clear cut. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if people are going into this movie thinking, oh, is this going to try to like humanize someone who abused a child? No, it's still very clear that like this is not okay what happened, but while still sort of dealing with kind of everyone's different perspectives on it, and in a way that's very nuanced and stuff like that. So I thought it was really well handled, and like just a big flex. This movie to me is a big flex, where it's like Todd Haynes was like, you know what, I'm gonna take this like tabloid ripped from the headline story and not only try to tell it, but pick apart the act of telling it. And it's just really, and I think I love Far From Heaven. I think that's like an amazing movie, but I feel like what this is doing is so much more of a high wire act.
It's true.
And therefore is like much more complicated in what it's trying to do, and also much more controlled. So it's sort of, I do feel when I look at those two movies as sort of bookends to Todd Haynes's filmography, and granted I haven't seen anything else, so I guess I shouldn't be making this comparison, but if I'm thinking of those as two endpoints in a timeline, it's definitely clear that there's been like an evolution of some kind. But with a lot of like similar themes, I think. All right. So now we're gonna do our short takes for Nyad, and so I'll get us started with that. And I liked that, Antonio, because I didn't write that into the beginning of the show, the plot premises of these. My brain, I guess, was like, there are 3 films. There's no way I could like summarize the plots of all 3 of these. So I'm glad we're doing that as we go. So Nyad is a biopic about Diana Nyad, who was and still is, I believe she's still alive, right? Yeah. Okay. She's a long distance swimmer, and so her claim to fame, though there is some controversy surrounding it, it was that she took many tries, but she swam from Cuba to the Florida Keys, uninterrupted, unaided. And so this is like her big claim to fame. And the movie sort of follows how she managed to actually do that. It's interesting because on the one hand, it's a biopic sort of like dealing with her as a historical, like a famous sports figure, but then it's also kind of a procedural, because it's sort of like, no, literally, like, how is a human able to swim from Cuba to the Keys, and does a lot of the sort of like procedural elements of that. So my short take is, I found Annette Benning's performance to be very annoying.
More like annoying Benning.
It was yeah, I know. And like, I like Annette Benning, so I was kind of like, I was like, I didn't like this because I was like, what are you doing to my impression of Annette Benning in this role? And I feel like that's largely due to, I think my understanding is that, and they sort of hinted this with the little clips that they show, because there is real footage kind of intercut in the movie, and I feel like they sort of hint at that just Diana Nyad in real life was a lot to handle. Like, she had a big personality, and she was kind of arrogant and sort of, stubborn for sure, and like, maybe not the not the easiest person to be around. But I feel like Annette Benning just like really dug deep into that in a way that made me actively like kind of like want to step out of the movie, where I'm just like, I don't know. And like Jodie Foster doing her best to counteract that, because I really liked her character. But I would say, so that was a big thing where like I was interested in this as a sports movie. I was like, oh, as like a against all odds sort of sports movie, I feel like this does work pretty well. But Annette Benning's performance as Diana Nyad was too much for me. And just like the editing of the movie, and the way they sort of structured flashbacks and the documentary footage and all that sort of stuff, like that, all that didn't gel for me. And so I feel like it does okay as a sports movie, kind of fails as a biopic. What did you all think?
I agree. This is gonna be maybe another boring episode where we all just agree with each other. There's no fighting, but I agree. I didn't particularly care for this. I didn't hate it. I wouldn't think it was like awful, but it just didn't really connect with me. And I'm glad, actually, Jen, to hear you say that Annette Benning's performance was off-putting enough that you were like, okay, I don't know if I want to deal with this anymore. Because I think that the thing that is the most worthy of recommending about this is the story. This is a story of a couple of women in their 60s, I believe, but like who are not like pretending to be anything but that. They both very much look like they're of that age. And, she gets sort of rekindles this idea in herself of like, I'm going to go back and do this thing that I tried to do 30, 35 years ago. And, puts in all this work to get back up to speed, and spoiler, ultimately does it. And question mark, asterisk, whatever. But ultimately does it. And I think there's something to that, like, I think about how my mom might like this movie, because it's just like, old broads getting it done. Yes. Like, she likes that. And that may be appealing, but one of the old broads is very abrasive and arrogant and full of themselves. And I think it's good that they present that. And I think that a lot of the critiques, and I mean, I put it in later in the outline in the spoiler section, but I don't think it needs to be spoiled, that like there's a lot of pushback about not just this swim, but everything she's done in her life. She's very big on inflating stories of what happened to her in the past, which is what leads people to say, well, when you did something and the only people who saw it were your employees, we don't know if it's true that it actually happened because you lied about all these other things. And so like, in the lead up to the movie, it was like, how can you do this inspirational story based on a person like that? And it sounds like one of the ways they did it was we made her really annoying, and we showed how bad she is about being honest and telling the truth in the movie. And said like, but we're still going to do the inspirational story anyway. To me, the reason to watch this movie is Jodie Foster. I think she's quite good in this, and there's lots of ways in which it almost doesn't feel like exceptional acting until you remember, like, I mean, I know I've listened to Jodie Foster in interviews. I know the way that she talks. She's not like this person, but she so embodies this role and the accent and the mannerisms and the movement that it feels excellent. And when they do show a quick little bit in the end, either as part of the credits or right before the credits, is it a spoiler to say that? I don't think so. Of the real person, and you see them, it's like, oh yeah, she nailed it. Like that's exactly who this person was. So I think that like it's if you have like any kind of inclination towards, I want to see an inspirational story, a pretty standard overcoming the odds sports story about a sport that you probably don't think about or care about, but are like, okay, like I'll watch that. I'll watch someone overcome the odds. And you want a good, very good acting performance and another very good acting performance that's super annoying. Then you can watch this movie, but I don't think otherwise it's like, gotta see it because it's only okay.
So I'm going to disagree a little bit.
Yeah.
This actually is one of my favorite. I like Annette Benning a lot, right? And and later we're going to talk about the fact that she hasn't won. Hilary Swank keeps taking her Oscars. This is one of my favorite of her performances. I grant that the character is abrasive and is a lot to swallow, but to me, like that's a credit to like Annette Benning, like her lack of vanity as an actor, that she really is willing to go there and to make herself look just like, be that unpleasant. And I don't know, I found I because these inspirational stories will often soften the edges of the sort of hero in the course of the thing. I liked the fact that, she was hard to love. And it kind of makes sense to me, given that what she's done, that she'd have all of these other character flaws as well. So I liked the presentation, and to be honest, I kind of liked her. I don't know what it says about me that I was kind of like, I get her.
It's amazing.
But I will agree also, like Jodie Foster is one of my favorite actresses of all time, and I'm sad that she doesn't act more, right? Back in the Silence of the Lambs, and when she won Best Actress like within like 3 years, and then there were some other films that since then, but like she's just acted less and less as she's gone along. So when I saw that these two actresses were going to be in a movie together, I was excited, and I'll agree, of the three films, it's definitely the least of the three, I think. But I did think that there was a lot about like open water swimming that I didn't understand. Like I swim now. Every time I go swimming, I think of Diana Nyad.
You're gonna be like, I shouldn't be tired.
I know. When I get to the edge of the pool, I'm just like, where's Jodie Foster throwing spaghetti at my face? But
you take your meals out of a tube.
Yeah, exactly.
You need a weird jellyfish mask.
Yeah, I'm just yelling fire, fire. Yeah, sorry, it's fire. I swim for like, at most I can swim for like an hour, and I'm exhausted. And so the thought like of what it would take to do this is just incredible, right? And it takes someone with like something a little bit screwy in the mind to set out to do this, and with all of the hazards and all the whatever. So yeah, I definitely, I could sense before this that I like this more than you two, and I think that's true. So I'm gonna stick up for the Annette Benning performance, and I hope that she gets a Best Actress nomination that she will lose. But this again, one of my favorite Annette Benning performances. So yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I just feel like she was even when I'm not gonna. We need to move on. We need to move on.
No, I will say I agree. I think it is a good performance, and I think it's very, I feel like there's such a crappy concept of just sort of like, it's so brave when a woman does something, does a performance that makes her look ugly. But like, she looks very ugly in a lot of because like it's just a damaging sport to be doing. So like she's like sunburnt and like her whole face is chapped, like chapped lips. And she's like shriveling almost from all the energy in all these different attempts and the training. And so I think that it's an exceptional performance in terms of all of that. And character's annoying, and I think that's the intent. Sometimes it's just like, I don't know if I want to spend more time with an annoying character, but I have full respect. I have no problem with her. I mean, apart from if I go through the list and see like maybe there's 5 performances I would rather have above her, but like if she got nominated, I would be like, great, like she did a great job. There's no like travesty. I would rather Jodie Foster get nominated.
She swam a lot
because I liked that performance.
Yeah, I guess
just keep swimming, Jen.
Yes, just keep swimming. Yeah, I guess for me, I think because now you're forcing me to think about like, why did I actually have this reaction to this? It's always better to understand why we react to things a certain way, and I feel like it was just dialed to 11 for too long, too long at a time, and it was, for me, it was not sustainable to sort of like tolerate her like telling the same stories over and over again, and then like being like, but I am the greatest, only I could do this, I have to do this, right? And I'm like, we get it. We really do. But yeah, but again, like, I've heard a lot of people talking about how she has a really good dynamic and rapport with Jodie Foster's character, and like I agree with that. Like I think they play the odd couple very well. Like and that was probably my favorite part of the movie, is like that is the parts that focus on their friendship, I feel like were the strongest parts to me.
Yeah.
All right. So now we can move on to The Killer. PT, why don't you take the lead on that one?
Sure. The Killer is the new movie from David Fincher. And it's a movie about a hitman played by Michael Fassbender. And it's really kind of set in his head as much as around him, where we have a lot of his internal thoughts while he works on a job, and then the events that happen after that job. It is a David Fincher thriller. I don't know if I want to say more than that about what goes on in the movie. But I will say I enjoyed this movie. To me, it is clearly in the sort of middle space of these 3 movies. It clearly came in second. Maybe it's overly dismissive to say it is a minor work from David Fincher, but it doesn't feel like it's trying to do too much. And, I think that the ability to enjoy this movie, or the likelihood of enjoying this movie, is dependent on whether you get on its wavelength or not. And I think its wavelength is very sardonic and very critical of the main character and this world around him and his attitude towards things. And I think that, I like that. And I was like, okay, like I enjoyed this, and I enjoyed sort of seeing how things unfold given that perspective. And but if you go in thinking like this is going to be a great movie about a badass hitman, I can't wait to see all the badass hitman stuff that happens, you're probably going to have a bad time. Yeah, I mean, I liked this going into the year. I thought this might be a movie I would love, and I didn't love it, but I liked it, and I'm glad that I saw it, and I'm glad it's out there.
Yeah, I think I really liked it too. I think it's a movie that was that had a particular aim and met its aim. I found it crisply directed, edited, and acted, especially from a reliably spiky Tilda Swinton. To me, that was
she's easily the best part.
She is like that. That's, we'll talk about that scene later. But I think it was a satisfying movie that did just maybe a little bit more than I expected, and most of that again comes down to Tilda Swinton. But it was just very like expertly crafted. It's not like breaking any boundaries or anything, but it was a perfectly like fine night at the movies.
I also really like this. I think it sounds like maybe I might have liked it a little bit more. It is one of those movies that when you're watching it in the moment, you're like, wow, David Fincher. Like, I'm having such a good time. And then for me, it was sort of like the farther out I've gotten from watching it, the more I'm kind of like, oh, true. I acknowledge this is sort of like lesser mid-tier Fincher, right? Like it's good, but it's not reaching the heights of some of his best work. So, but I think Michael Fassbender is amazing in this movie. I think he really understood the assignment. It's great to see him back. I'm a big fan of his in general, and he really wears a bucket hat well. And and I do feel like wavelength is a good way to put it, PT, because I feel like in the first few minutes I was like, this is a lot of first person voiceover. But then when you understand the pretty soon after that, it becomes clear what the point of the voiceover is, and then like what is its relationship to what we're watching and stuff like that. And so I think then it becomes a much more interesting movie. Once you kind of understand, oh, okay, this is why this is the case. It's not, because I feel like I've heard people try to say that this is merely a genre exercise. And I don't think it's just that. I think it's doing a little bit more than that, right? Like to be like, oh, let's just like take this hitman and like make a thriller where he has to go do a bunch of things, right? It's more than that. But at the same time, some other people are sort of like, this is like an amazing masterpiece. Fincher's best movie since Zodiac or Seven or something. I'm like, no, like I'm not quite there either. So I think this is a solid good time. I would say that I think I was a little cooler on the ending, and I think the ending for me actually had a lot to do with sort of my overall impression of the film. You know what I mean? Like, and why it was like, while I was watching it, I was like, wow. But then afterwards, after time passed, I was a little cooler on it. So I think, but otherwise, I had a really good time watching it. And I think we're ready probably to move into recommendation algorithm, because I literally was about to say, I'd recommend people watch it. So we're going to move into the recommendation algorithm, in which we establish the audience of each of these films. There we go. Sorry, this is a short delay. So, we are in varying degrees of enjoyment of all three of these films. Which of these would you actually want people to see? Or, as in the spirit of the recommendation algorithm, which types of people should see each of these movies, right? Like, you know what I mean? Because I think the assumption that, and this is very fitting because we're talking about Netflix, which arguably started the recommendation algorithm concept. And so, like, if people are, which Netflix algorithms are going to fit for each of these three films, do you think?
I don't know if I can answer that question necessarily, but what I do want to say is the movie that I enjoyed the least is probably the one that is going to be the most widely enjoyable, because it is what it says on the tin, and that's Nyad, where you're just sort of like, oh, is this an inspirational sports movie biopic? You're like, yep. It's like, does someone overcome the odds and do something crazy? It's like, yeah, they do. And great acting performances from the two leads that are billed above the title. Yes, that's what you get. Good. Whereas I think both The Killer and May Decembr, if you go into The Killer saying this is David Fincher's Hitman movie, the people to whom that appeals may not actually like what happens, because it isn't, it isn't a Seven or Fight Club, but it's with a hitman. It is a little bit different. The approach is a little, I think, more recursive, maybe, is a way of saying it. I don't know, but it's a little bit more about, like, having this character sort of hitting the, like, what are we doing, and what's happening.
It's more contemplative.
Yes.
And more, I wouldn't call it a genre exercise like some critics have, but it is more of a thought exercise, I think, than the two films you just mentioned.
Yes. And I think if you see May Decembr and you're like, oh, I want to watch a movie, like, if you think it's going to be like a pleasant movie with Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman, you may not be prepared for the subject matter or the developments that unfold. So, yeah, I mean, I think that people really shouldn't read the descriptions of these movies, especially May Decembr, because I would say I would recommend. I would, obviously, because I like it the most, I would most recommend May Decembr if people are prepared for the fact that it is, not necessarily super fun, subject matter or as a jumping off point. Yet it is a movie that is not necessarily like making fun of it, and it's not like wringing laughs from this thing, but it is it's humorous, and so it's very conflicting in its own way, and so I think if people are willing to do that and want to accept that, they will. There's a good chance that they may enjoy it, but I think that a lot of people are going to watch it for 20 minutes and then X out and thumbs down it and be like, I watched this movie, it sucked. So
I agree with pretty much all of what PT just said. I mean, I think that that's probably right, that Nyad has the sort of broadest appeal, and that is the closest to sort of what the description promises. The Killer, my gauge for The Killer. So my mother is like is always been the biggest fan of like movies with just like violent, like killer, like serial killer movies. You know those like Ashley Judd movies back in like the 90s or early 2000s.
Oh yeah.
We'd watch those as a family, right? And I remember that I watched Netflix actually when I was in Texas, and I noticed that she had watched The Killer, but she'd only watched the first 30 minutes. So I finished it, and I was like, why didn't you finish it? She said like it was boring, and I was like, well, go back and just because like we're talking about it and we're using words like contemplative, and I think that that's right, but there are some really amazing action-packed moments in here. We'll talk about it in spoiler mode, that were just incredibly well choreographed and just really thrilling and exciting. So once she got to that, so when she finished it, she was like, "Oh yeah, that was pretty good." So there are some. It's definitely more contemplative than you would expect, but I think it can still satisfy that itch if that's the kind of thing that you're looking for. And then for May Decembr. I don't know, like, I guess I kind of alluded to this when I sort of said like, well, there's like the Lifetime version of this. There's like the sort of like Dateline, like news magazine version of this, that the description kind of makes you expect to see. But then May Decembr is kind of like the literary fiction-y take on it, right? It's like this over time and what happens, and contemplating the sort of thorny questions about what that would look like. So I don't know. I mean, I May Decembr is the one that I'm going to just recommend to people. And if I'm wrong, whatever.
The ways in which May Decembr could be challenging, and I actually want to push back on the idea in a second, but like, the ways in which it would be challenging for a lot of people, I feel like are reason to recommend it. You know what I mean? Like, to be like, if you're a movie nerd and you have one thing that you one agenda item that you want to push on people to kind of like get them out of their comfort zone, but in a good way. You know what I mean? Like, to be like, not to use, like, we only have one of those a year probably, right? Where people are like, so what should I be watching right now? And if like that's the one that you can use to be like, you might get mad at me later for making you watch this movie, but I think you're going to be into it once you kind of get past the initial, like, what is this? But I really want to push back on that, because I actually think that one of the brilliant things about May Decembr is that it sort of like satisfies the craving for a salacious story while critiquing it at the same time. And so in that way, I think a lot of people who would be like into the tabloid stories just at face value, they would even watch the Lifetime version of this movie. I think they actually are still going to be drawn to the story. They just might need to talk to somebody afterwards, right, about it. And actually, what I would say is like the person who would be the most into May Decembr is someone who, when you're browsing the internet and you see clickbait, you mouse over it and then you stop yourself. That's the person who's, and maybe I'm describing me, like that's the person, or asking for a friend. I don't know. Like that's the person that I think would like this movie the most, because it's doing both of those things, right? It's like dealing with the sort of sensational aspect of the story, and the ripped from the headlines, to borrow from Law and Order. I had to use it. Antonio's here. I got to use the Law and Order job. Like I feel like it has a duality to it in that sense, right? And it also, like, if you like something like Big Little Lies, where it's just like women being feisty with each other and kind of undercutting each other and kind of being conniving and manipulative and like like this dialed to 1,000. Like it's the best version of that type of thing I've seen in a very long time, where you're just like glued to the screen being like, I cannot believe they're doing, these two people are talking to each other in this way right now. So in that way, I feel like it's juicy. It's juicy in a way, and it's not so art housey that's good that someone who's into that sort of thing would be turned away, I want to say.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually why we're going to be, I feel like, so I've been tracking the sort of critical reception of this movie. So when it premiered, which I want to say it was at Venice. I don't know this off the top of my head, though. Like, whenever it came out on the film festival circuit, it was sort of lukewarm because a lot of critics were like, I love this, but, like, what are other people going to make of this? What is the Academy going to make of this, right? And so people were kind of downplaying it a little bit. But I feel like now that it's on Netflix, there's this huge wave. Oh, thank you, PT. It premiered at Cannes. And it was kind of lukewarm reception, like there wasn't a lot of buzz. But now that it's on Netflix and people have taken to the internet about this movie, like, I feel like it's going to be a bigger deal than people expected. And that might translate, spoiling our Oscars discussion, but that might translate into Oscar traction potentially.
Can I ask one last question before we go into spoiler mode? So these are all Netflix movies. I assume we all watch them on Netflix. Is that right? Of the three movies, which do you think would have benefited the most from seeing on the big screen?
I feel like the big screen would have benefited The Killer. Being in an audience would have benefited May Decembr.
Oh, that's a good call. I like it.
I like that.
Because like Fincher's like precision directing, I feel like really benefits from a big screen.
Sure.
And just like the visuals. The other thing for recommendation algorithm is like, because Fincher has said that Haywire, the Soderbergh movie, was a big inspiration for this, and it also has Michael Fassbender in it. So I feel like if you like that movie, there's a lot here, especially one fight scene in particular that like is very like Haywire. So that's the other thing too. But yeah, I think it's a really good call. Yeah, I think or seeing it also with cocktails is May Decembr, right? Like have a bunch of your friends over, have some wine, and then all like gasp at May Decembr.
I will note, having been sort of kicking it for a while, there were a lot of really great like vista shots in Nyad. There was some very strong visuals, and the sort of recording of the swimming and sort of her experience in the open water, really in all the sort of swimming locales that happens. Again, I don't think that then answers Antonio's question of you should have seen it on the big screen, but I bet it would have. Every movie benefits from the big screen in some ways, and I think that some of those big ocean vistas would have been really, really great in that context.
All right, so I think we're ready to go into spoiler mode. So if you've not seen all of these movies, or you do not care if one of these movies, like you've seen two, but the third one you don't care if it's spoiled, unless that's you, do not proceed, right? Like, because we are going to talk about, after I hit the spoiler mode music, we're going to talk about all three of these movies. We are going to go in sequence roughly, but we reserve the right to sort of jump around and talk about them together if we need to. So you have been warned. All right, so we're going to start with May Decembr. I might be biased or it might be recency bias because that's the one I watched most recently. But I feel like I had the most questions about May Decembr, and so I want to start with that one. So maybe, if there's a question on here, we don't have to necessarily go in order because I just had so many. I was like, let's keep going. I have more questions. But I want to start with the ending. This is tradition on the show now. We, after spoiler mode, go to the most spoilery thing, potentially. So why do you think we end with the conversation between Elizabeth and Gracie, Natalie Portman, and then after that, sort of in like a little bit of an epilogue, but really the end of the film? Like, why do we end with Natalie Portman on set on her movie?
So I don't know. Is the real answer to that? But I will say this in terms of my reaction to it, and maybe I'm wrong about this, or maybe it was slow of me to not realize it until that point. I didn't realize until then that Natalie Portman was playing someone who's not a good actress, and this movie was going to be trash. Like, for some reason, the whole time I was like, oh, she's doing research for like the Todd Haynes movie about this that's happening in her world. And like once we sort of got to that, and not that like her, it's such this terrible performance or anything, but I was like, oh, right, this is just going to be another version of the cheesy movie she watched, or in doing her research. Like, this is a Lifetime movie, like this is, or it's the Netflix streaming movie that's just chum that gets thrown out in like late February, and it's just like, yeah, we have 2 new movies this week, this is one of them. It's maybe on the it's the second box on the splash page for 2 days, some Friday and Saturday, and then you never hear about it again.
So you thought she was like Daniel Day-Lewis, like that?
I mean, not
like,
necessarily that she was that, but I was sort of just like, well, like she's like a Natalie Portman, like she's playing a version of herself, and was sort of making fun of that kind of maybe like the method of trying to track someone,
right?
And
she watches the presumably like the Lifetime-esque version on her TV, right?
Which is, so I was like, oh, that now we're doing the arty version, like 20, 30 years later, we're getting the arty version of what had been the sort of quick Alyssa Milano starred movie from the late 90s.
Shots fired. Like,
well, I'm just thinking who was Amy.
Anytime anyone gets out of line, I'm playing that.
I love that. Yeah. So anyway, I feel like that. So that end where it was sort of all of this and all this upheaval that was created by her presence isn't in pursuit of some like meaningful, masterful piece of art, but was just going to be another crappy version of this story.
Like, how brilliant is her acting? Like, how brilliant is her acting in that scene that you immediately know that she's bad? You know what I mean? Like that, or that it's not going well. And how panicky she is about that. You know what I mean? Like, that's like when she's asked for another cut or another take, when she's like, I feel like I'm getting at something truer or real or whatever, right? And there's so much desperation in her voice when she says that, and you know that she's never gonna get there. And it's just like, oh wow, Todd Haynes, like, not pulling any punches. It's amazing. But yeah, right. And if we compare that to the like looking into the camera, I don't remember the technical term for that shot anymore, but like where she's reading the letter, like, that's really good.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's
it's a much better performance.
You feel like she's really in it, and there's all those little moments when she's like staying with Julianne Moore, or they're sitting in like the dressing room, or outside the fitting room, and like she's like moving her body to copy the same, like she's looking in the mirror to copy the gesture, and it's like, oh, she's crafting this impeccable performance, but then that's maybe that's something that she is able to do, and then she can't perform it on the set. Or again, maybe this is because I should have picked up on this all along. Once the husband / former victim is watching the YouTube clip, or we only hear it, but the YouTube clip of her accepting an award, and in retrospect it's clearly like a People's Choice Award. It's not it's like, it means the most to me because it was voted on by you. And it's just sort of like, oh, I get it. Like, yeah, she's that kind of person. She's like, MTV Movie Award level.
But she's aspiring for more, right? Because people like her for some show called Nora's Ark, which sounds like it should be on CBS. Like, it's, what I mean? Like, at like 7:00. Like, it's like, but that she's like looking. Maybe she's aspiring to be a greater actress, but she's been sort of pigeonholed in these more like less challenging sort of soapy shows, or films. So I don't know. So Antonio, what's your interpretation? Because I feel like I kind of thought she might have been a talented actress, but then like Julianne Moore got in her head, kind of. Or was she bad the whole time?
I think she was bad the whole time.
Okay.
But I too also didn't get a read on that. I mean, look, there is one hint, right? That she's maybe not as professional an actress. Obviously, like when she sleeps with Joe, when she crosses that line, that there's her process is something's off with her process. but in terms of it as like the last moment of the film, I thought it was perfectly appropriate because this is a film about people who perform. I mean, obviously Elizabeth like literally performing, right? But like Joe in the course of their marriage is always performing for Gracie, right? Like there's that moment when Joe comes into the house and he can hear Gracie crying, and he's just like, here we go. This is, I have to, there's something I have to do
Right.
now.
He has to like bolster himself before he goes in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And you sense like you can feel the weight of like 24 years or however long it's been of being that and doing that. And it's exhausting. You just look at him and he's exhausted.
Yeah.
And then Gracie is performing as well, right? On so many levels, Gracie is performing. You know, you mentioned that sort of scene where she's talking to Elizabeth, because like Gracie at a certain point even refers to herself as naive, right? And it's important.
Also secure. Then later she says she's
Yeah,
secure.
that's
It's confusing.
Right. Well, but I think that
maybe she's not being honest. We don't know. I mean, who can tell?
Well, I think that it's important for from the moment of that affair on. I think it was important for her to put on this sort of act that she was this naive person, both to Joe, to herself, and to the world. But in this one moment that you're talking about, Jen, like right before when she has this sort of final confrontation with Elizabeth, once she realizes sort of where Elizabeth stands, and once she really views her as an adversary, she wants Elizabeth to know that she's savvier than she's making herself out to be,
Right.
and that Elizabeth and that Elizabeth has underestimated her, right? And she needs her to know that without totally like giving up like the act. I mean, I think Gracie is fascinating. We'll talk more about her in a bit, but like that to me, it just seemed right, because it was just watching people, you know, like everyday performances of their lives, right?
Right.
And so
they're also performing being normal. You know what I mean? Like they were working so hard to have this like very innocuous domestic life, right, with their community, their neighbors, their friends. They're having cookouts, like they're trying so hard to be like, no, like this is normal. We're normal.
You know, I love that the biggest crying scene in the movie involved someone who canceled a cake order. Right?
I know.
Her sister is sick or something. I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I hate it when this happens. You know, it's just a waste of food and they're not going to be able to do it. And then she just freaks out. And then Joe has to calm her down. And then he has to eat the cake. And like, you just get the sense that like, this has happened before. It's going to happen again. Yeah, loved it. Yeah. Jen, what about you? What did you think about the last scene?
So I feel like it really cemented the idea. The main idea of the movie was about this idea of like, can we ever, is it possible to get at some sort of truth with a person, right? Or with like, and representing other people through either through stories or through journalism or whatever it is, right? And because that's the thing that Elizabeth is really chasing the whole movie, right? She's like, I need to get to the point where it's like unhealthy, right? Like for me, it was an earlier red flag when she goes to the pet shop and has the scene where she's like trying to relive the ecstasy of their illicit encounter. And then I was like, oh no, like this is not good. She is not okay. Like, and then even like her director's like, you really need to come back. Like why are you still there? Right. Like, so there's clearly some sort of weird, like almost like fetishism she has at getting at the truth of their lives, in a way that she's still chasing in that final scene. And you just get, again, I thought the brilliance of that final scene in particular was that it said so much because it's sort of like, I don't know, like turn the lights on so we could see the garishness of what was happening in a way. Like, because you could tell just the way and they're repeating the stupid line about the snake. Like, it's not that kind of snake or whatever. Yeah. It's so bad. And the fact that they repeat that over and over again, it's so clear that this is not what she thought she was going to be getting or achieving, right? And that she's so desperate to find the truth. And like, but also I feel like the reason that the scene with Gracie has to be the penultimate scene right before that, is because Gracie totally upends Elizabeth's notion that there is a core truth that she can find, right? Because, and like, this movie is like a huge critique of at least acting, if not movie making. I don't know. Like, you could, I was listening to Filmcast the other day, and like they were arguing back and forth about whether or not this is indicting this individual actress as having this appetite for this sort of like research, or is it just the art of acting inherently has these problems? So we can talk about that too in a second. But I feel like that scene has to come before, because the truth bomb, maybe that's the wrong word, but like the bomb that Gracie drops of like, oh, like that's my tragic backstory of being abused as a child was not true. Like, she sort of implies that she set that up, right? She's like, oh, I talk to Georgie every day, like, because Elizabeth's like, he told you, because like she received that as like a secret truth, right, from Georgie, that like she wasn't supposed to know that Gracie's brothers abused her as a child, right? And so like it totally upends her idea of like, oh, I figured it out, I cracked this character because I understand why they're doing the things they're doing now, right? And so she totally messes that up. And that's sort of why I was like, well, there's a possibility that Elizabeth's so shaken by that whatever momentum she had gained by doing this research in terms of understanding the character is just like totally destroyed, and she can't do it anymore, right? Because Gracie sort of like messed up her neat and tidy, like, oh, this is the character's past, therefore it understands how they are now and how I can play them.
So I'm gonna tie this into Nyad, because there's obviously like a connection. There's a connection in Nyad where we have these flashbacks about sexual abuse that Diana Nyad endured when she was younger. I agree with all the things that they're doing, sort of interesting things in May Decembr. I think it's less successful. In Nyad, it's just sort of, it's there, like it's definitely a part of the text, but what to do with it, or how to read it, because even Nyad is like, that doesn't define me, I'm not a victim, and and the way that she says it, but like the way that the movie presents it is almost like, or is this presented as kind of like an explanation for her prickly nature, or for why she wants to do these things, which is kind of an uncomfortable, sort of thing for us to live with. So you had this sort of sense of the filmmakers sense that it was important and it needed to be there. But I don't know, just the way that it was presented, it made me feel a little strange about, and I'm not sure how to read it. So I agree that there's that you ask the question sort of ahead of time, like, what do you think it actually happened? Or how do we believe Gracie here that it was sort of made up? I mean, I think it's entirely possible in May Decembr, given her psychology and sort of state of arrested development. But I also think it's entirely possible that it's a lie, another tale that Gracie has sort of spun for sympathy or for a shortcut for others to understand, explain, or excuse her in the way that she desires.
Yeah, I think, to speak on May Decembr first on this, I think that the critique isn't necessarily acting as a craft, but it's just talking about how we build narratives for ourselves to try to explain our lives and other people's lives. And it's a sort of like, oh, well, this is a story and it's really easy for me to understand it because this is the story. But then once you actually get into a lived experience, and things are just inevitably more complicated than that. And so trying to simplify it is going to create problems. But sometimes we do that, to our own detriment, to sort of be like, well, this is the story of what happened to me. And, like Gracie being like, well, he seduced me. Like, he's the one who came on to me. Like, that's the story she tells herself. So she's not a predator. And that just makes it easier for her to live with the reality of it. And, I think that, I don't know if I believe her in the end saying that story that, my first son told me that never happened. Like I wasn't actually abused when I was a child. But one of the narratives that had been sort of, again, an easy one for everyone to tell is she abandoned her old family to be with her, underage lover, and they start a family. But then she's like, well, I talk to him every day. It's like, oh, so he isn't, this like prickly, jerky guy in a, bar band in Savannah who's like, mean to everyone around him because his mom abandoned him, because he talks to his mom all the time, or at least talks to her enough that she does know about that conversation they had. So, Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically just that like all like the real story of everything is more complex, and trying to get an easy narrative is going to do more harm than good. And I don't know exactly how that influences the last scene of the movie, but I think that that's a sort of a part of what's going on in terms of Nyad and those flashbacks. Yeah, I found it hard to not read it as she goes into the water for multiple 60 hours, 20, 40, 60 hours at a time to like almost sort of like whip herself about this like sad memory, and she keeps reliving these moments in her past that are painful to her, and it's like this is the way of processing it. I don't know if they really like unpack that beyond just sort of the juxtaposition. I believe I texted this to Jen. I don't know if it was to both of you. It might have been to Jen on the side, because we're not talking about these movies before we get on the pod, but that I break the rules sometimes. But I was like, I'm caught. Please don't put in the newspaper that I
I'm a mad woman now. You can't stop me with these sound drops.
No, I love it. We are, as Greg has said, we are moving closer to just an AM, an FM morning show. We're drive time soundboard show. Anyway, that like it felt like it was sort of building up to this reveal, and it was like right at the midpoint of the movie that like showed, oh yeah, and the coach took advantage of her, sexually abused her, and that's a part of her story. But when you watch it on Netflix, like it pops up on the pretty prominently in the top left corner of the screen, here's the content of this movie, because that's how a streaming service works. So it was like depictions of sexual abuse. So it's like, oh, I guess there's going to be sexual abuse in this movie. So all that sort of like build up, maybe that was supposed to be a twist, but it was so clearly not a twist. Like as soon as that coach was there, I was like, well, I don't trust that guy. Like that guy's suspect. Like that's where this story's going to go. But then it kept like holding it back, and it felt like it was thinking it was building up to some sort of awful reveal, but instead it was just sort of like, yep, I knew that from the start. So I think it blunted the impact.
Yeah, the flashbacks in Nyad were probably the least effective part to me, because, and it, once you pointed that out, that like, oh, they're actually foretelling, like they're spoiling their own twist with the content warning. Then I was like, oh, maybe that's what it is. But I also think it's just like there didn't seem to be any purpose with individual flashbacks. Do you know what I mean? Like, and we had so many of them. They were like it very frequently, and like I think part of that was because sometimes they were explanatory flashbacks of like, here's something that happened to her in the past, maybe explains how she is now. But then it was also like when she was hallucinating in the water, she often remembered. So it was just, I feel like we were going back to that well very frequently. And I feel like if I went to each individual scene, other than building up to the abuse part as like a big reveal, I'm not sure each individual flashback told us something new. It felt very repetitive to me, of like, okay, we get it. Like she's been doing this since she was a kid. She was like high achieving. Oh, and her coach also abused her. That's really terrible. He should not have done that. But at the same time, does that really illuminate anything about her current quest? There is one, I think, mini monologue she has with Jodie Foster's character towards the end. It's sort of like when they're kind of reconciling, and she sort of says like, I'm sorry. And then I feel like she starts to talk about what her traumatic childhood and the abuse. And then Jodie Foster says something like, that was not your fault. Right. Like they have like a pretty kind of like expected conversation about it. Like it wasn't your fault. She's crying. Right. Like, but I feel like by then we had seen those flashbacks so many times that like the impact, I think it felt like that monologue was or that conversation was supposed to have a lot more impact than it actually did. And maybe it's because the film's operating under the assumption that there is a skeleton key for every character, right? Of like, this unlocks everything about Diana Nyad, which is not true. Right. I'm sure there were lots of other things that made her annoying, right? Like, I'm kidding.
Wow. But she's not insecure. Make sure they show that she's not insecure.
Well, that's why she's dangerous. a bunch of people almost die because trying to help her because she's insecure.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if, to me, the other component of that, in addition to the flashbacks, I did not like the real life documentary footage being mixed in.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was flashbacks, which I will admit at first I didn't realize. It was sort of like, this is what she was doing in the 70s when she tried it. And then this was the 2011, 2012, and 13 was Annette Benning trying it. But then they would start mixing in, TV news footage of that moment as well. And I think that both of those elements, if they were taken out of the movie would be stronger. Like, even if no other changes were made, I think that just sort of the performances and just the story as it existed would work better. And I think there'd be enough sort of things that imply what is in that content. Like you're saying, I don't think it added a lot. I don't think it really gave us, it wasn't really showing us things that we needed to see that we didn't get from the acting and the writing of the dialogue between them. And I wonder if, and I don't mean this to be disparaging towards documentary filmmakers, I wonder if the instincts they have as documentarians of, let's sprinkle in backstory, let's do some footage from back in the day, let's get these things from different angles and mix almost different formats, because some things look like they were on a VHS. Like some things that were clearly filmed for the movie, like the actors are in the scene, look like they're filmed on either a VHS camera or a very low resolution instead of a
right. It's simulating archival footage, kind of.
Right. And I feel like that some of that may have been the instincts of the directors because they're used to doing that in documentaries, but I think that ultimately it was a negative in this movie.
Now I'm like, do we go back to talking about May Decembr? I guess to bring in another thing about truth and is there a simple truth? This May Decembr, now propped up by our side conversation about Nyad, I think, reminded me a lot of Anatomy of a Fall.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's doing a very similar thing of sort of showing there is no simple narrative that we can reconstruct or construct, or we can, there's and that every subjective telling has a different take, right? And so, I mean, in May Decembr, it's people in denial and lying to themselves versus I guess people selfishly manipulating others for their own gain, or but in Anatomy of Fall, I think it's a very similar thing where it's there's no central truth that we can try to find. It's all constructed, right? And so, I thought the two films were very, very good pairing because they could not be more different in terms of tone and style.
Well, yeah. I mean, Anatomy of a Fall, we're obviously concerned with what happened in a what was this a murder? Was this a whatever? Whereas here, what I think is interesting about May Decembr is this idea of the lurid part took place a long time ago, and it was and that's where the story, the tabloid version of the story is just knowing the gory details. It's a pet store, right? Knowing their ages, that kind of stuff. But what time, what years, considering these people over years does is it necessarily complicates things, right? And invited us to ask really interesting questions what is Joe like as a father, right? You have that scene with him and his son on the roof where he's smoking, Joe, the father, is getting his first joint from his son, and the son is kind of shocked by it, but we're not, because we've seen Joe and Gracie. And I think earlier Gracie was chiding him for how many beers he was having. He's that's your second one or something like that, very, very early in the movie. So you get a sense that she's sort of kept him under control. And the scene that I read earlier about where she the poem that he'd written her when he was in 7th grade, right? I mean, it's so funny. It's one of the funniest moments in this movie.
Because it's so clearly written by a 7th grader.
It's so clearly written by a 7th grader. And the way that she presents it even to Elizabeth it's like it's kind of maternal, like you think it's maternal, right? Like it's like
Right. She's proud of it. Yeah.
Yeah, my son wrote that, but then when you realize it was your lover when you were 36 years old, and this is what like wooed you, it's just sort of, it's like gross. But then again, considering like what their dynamic has been like since then, how they've sort of settled into their routines, and then the fact that their children, clearly like they hate her, like they have such an antipathy toward Gracie, and as for Joe, I feel like there's a degree of sympathy, but there's like, he clearly loves his kids. But his kids, I don't know, I sense like some pity that they have toward their father, but like what that looks like, how that I don't know, how that develops over time is just a fascinating question. And I give, Charles Melton is an actor I didn't know very well. And I think he was just maybe famous for just like being incredibly good looking. So he fits like the role very well. Like he looks the part.
Critics keep calling him the Riverdale guy, because I guess his big role before this was being on Riverdale.
Yeah. So,
which is a CW show, in case people don't know, which I have not seen, but I know people who enjoy that show.
Of course, he played Reggie Mantle on Riverdale, as we all know.
Right. Yes. I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but I mean, he's the one who's won a couple of critics, a couple of awards already, right?
He won Gotham's.
Gotham award, yeah.
And then he's been the ones we mentioned in the movie news segment in this episode. I think he also
did he win New York Films Critic? Did he win?
He won both. Yeah, but I knew I was forgetting another New York award.
So I am curious what. I think Jen, I sense Natalie Portman was your favorite of the three central performances.
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciated what she was. I feel like what she's doing is being underappreciated relative to the other two, potentially, because it is kind of more complicated and has more layers to it. But I mean, it's hard because I think Charles Melton is amazing. He's so good, and whatever awards he's about to get or has gotten and about to get, he absolutely deserves them 100%. And actually, that roof scene that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. I think is maybe my favorite moment. It's such an important moment in the movie. Maybe my favorite, like, because he has that amazing line where he's like, "I can't tell if we're connecting or if I'm creating a bad memory for you in real time," while he's sobbing, and high, he's it's so good. And I think the movie overall, and this is largely because of his performance, he's so convincing as someone who is like had to lead a life as an adult but is still a child, right? And I don't know how you do that. A part of it I feel like he acted like a dad, but then he has these moments every once in a while where like, oh, you were a child who was never allowed to really grow up because you had you both had to grow up too fast and never were allowed to actually grow up because you've always been with Gracie. And so I don't know. And they even give him a dad potbelly. Yeah. Which I thought I was that's a really good detail, because I feel like he moves around like he's a dad, but at the same time he's Charles Melton, so he's very much not he probably had to prepare a lot for his dad bod, right? Actively.
Yeah, I saw an article. He had to gain 20 pounds for the role.
Right.
Instead of hitting the weight room, he hit Ben and Jerry's. He just made sure to put.
But I think the magic of that rooftop scene is that you can picture them. They're obviously interacting as father and son, and that's it's very touching. But you can also see them as peers.
Sure,
because they're not that much far apart in age, and it's really bizarre, right? But yeah, PT, you were going to say something, I think.
Oh no, I mean, I was just going to say, if I think we've sort of sneakily, Antonio has backdoored us into who was our favorite performance in the movie. I do think my answer is Natalie Portman, because I think that it's obviously kind of the center of the movie, and I think that she is operating on so many layers and levels, and in some ways is sort of, I don't know if she's really making fun of herself. I feel like she's known for sometimes making these bold choices, or sort of being this is my Jackie Kennedy, this is how I'm going to portray this. Deal with it, and we're doing it, and so that's sort of I'm working on this craft, but then how good is she at it? Sometimes it's impeccable. All that I think is really good, but the movie doesn't work if Charles Melton isn't as good as he is. And I mean, obviously on some level the movie doesn't work without all three of them, because I think Julianne Moore also,
for
like
sure.
the way, like she has, I don't want to say it's the easiest role, but it's probably like, you know, the most sort of like right in her wheelhouse of just sort of like, it's a little campy. She can kind of overplay it a little bit, but that's also what the character is doing. So, you know, she can go like whenever she starts to feel like there's a threat in some way, she goes into baby voice and the lisp gets turned up from like a 2 to a 10. And like, it's great. Like, I love all of that. It's very subtle. And she like really nails some of those little digs that she gets in on her family. And then when she starts targeting Natalie Portman with them as well, just shiv between the ribs. It's so good. Like, she's great at it. And you kind of need all three of them. It's, you know, obviously the movies are very different, but it's a lot like The Holdovers, where it is this 3-person engine kind of churning in the center of the story. And you need all of them working at the peak of their game for the movie to be as successful, both movies to be as successful as they are.
My favorite performance was Julianne Moore, actually. I mean, I love Natalie Portman. I've always loved Natalie Portman. And Charles Melton is a revelation in the movie. So, but Julianne Moore is an actress who I've always loved, like and I wish that her Oscars had been for like Boogie Nights and Far From Heaven and not from Still Alice. But to me, I agree with PT, right? Like the big scenes, like the crying scene with the cake, that is definitely like in her wheelhouse. That's one of the campier moments in the movie. But for me, that's balanced with these sort of flashes of cunning in between the histrionics and the doe-eyed obliviousness. And the fact that she's constant, the way that she just looks at Natalie Portman, just like that she has to maintain this sort of facade of like, I'm just this innocent woman who, Joe had more lovers than I did when we first met, because he had 2 girlfriends when he was in 7th grade, that she can say that with just like a straight face, and like that maybe you believe that she believes that, but then she has these other moments when she's just cutting Elizabeth down. And that I don't know, that I found to be really fascinating. So, but yeah, all 3 great. So, all right, great.
What about The Killer, guys?
The Killer?
Oh, yeah, that's right. We still need to talk about that. Are we done with Nyad? I guess that was the one who was supposed to be next. Can we talk about jellyfish, like, for a minute?
Oh yeah, let's talk about jellyfish.
Like, this is the craziest thing, and honestly, how crazy was this endeavor was honestly what kept me watching, even though I was kind of bothered by a lot of other things in the movie.
Sure.
Just the pure like how nuts an endeavor this was. And I think the film actually did do a pretty good job of showing that, right? Like and like the fact that she had to have a jellyfish expert like sign on to her team, and then the jellyfish expert's like, you get stung one more time, you're gonna die. And it's just
but also, I mean, in reading, there is a long, and I put it in the document. I don't know if it needs to necessarily go in the show notes, but it's from Defector, which is the website by the people who used to write for Deadspin when Deadspin was an active website and not just some venture capital owned content farm posting AI articles. So it's this really in depth. There's a guy who's out there in the world who is also a marathon swimmer, who is friends with other marathon swimmers that are Diana Nyad's contemporaries, who has like made it his mission in life to be like, Diana Nyad is a liar, and I'm going to expose her lies, and is like just her nemesis. And it's a long article kind of about him.
Where's that movie?
Look, that's what I'm saying. But this is the movie that Diana Nyad wanted to make. So like, we got that movie. But in that article, when they talk about like, and the whole sport just sounds crazy. But one of the things where it's just sort of like, well, this wasn't even like, are we sure this is unassisted? She was wearing a special wetsuit. Like, the special jellyfish protection wetsuit is one of the reasons why it's not an official confirmed swim from Cuba to Florida. So then it's sort of like, that makes her sound better than you. Like, what are we talking about? But they also say that apparently like she was like touched a couple of times during it, which is not shown. And the people who were the independent observers were on her payroll. So like, there was no kind of whatever
Right. There's no
person
one
from the
whose sole
organization.
job was to testify that this was a real thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Who was not, did not have a conflict of interest.
Yeah. I will say that watching all of that and watching the sort of, the jellyfish attack, and then she has the weird kind of like bag over her head, and then she needs to get the like terrifying mask. That's a great Halloween costume if anyone wants to go that route, is the wetsuit with the weird jellyfish protection mask. All of that, it made me feel like watching a movie as someone who doesn't like sports, like Blanket doesn't like sports, which, I'll watch like a sports movie sometimes with Jasmine, and she'll just be like, I don't know why anyone cares about this. Like, who cares? Like, so what if they don't win? Like, it's just a game. And it's just like, no, but you care that like they're trying to win the championship. And it's just like, okay, but like, so what? And like, I was really kind of feeling that, where it's just like, who cares if you swim to Florida? Like, who cares? Like, why? Like, this looks awful and everything seems terrible. At least when you climb a mountain, it's like, well, no one's been up there. It's like, everyone's done this. Just get a boat. Like, you can do it. Like, why are we doing it swimming? Like, what's the point? Which is not the takeaway you should have. But yeah, it was wild. It was wild, all the things that she went through to do this thing. I guess because her dad mentioned it once is sort of the implication. But yeah, I don't know. Her last name's not even Nyad.
Sort of like how this is slightly tangential, but the way in which you were saying, which I totally agree with, that that May Decembr doesn't work without Charles Melton's performance being as good as it is. I would say that Nyad does not work at all. Like, and I know, like, I've been critical of it, but like the movie does not work at all if Jodie Foster is not good, right? Yes. Or if Jodie Foster is not playing that part, right? Because like every time she's like about to ramp up to tell the story of Nyad and why her dad and like told her that she was the one and mythologically whatever, right? There's at least once where Jodie Foster's like, okay, and like sits her back down or like stops her from telling the story again. And like those are that it doesn't work unless you have that other character to kind of like temper her insanity. I actually want to give a shout out to, and I can't remember the actor's name, the navigator. He was great.
Oh yeah, he's very good.
And like the way he's talking about the course and the winds and the tide and all that, I was locked in. I was like, where's his spin-off movie where he's just navigating and charting?
It's Rhys Evans.
Oh, okay. And why do I know him? Like, I know him from other things.
He was in Notting Hill. He was the lizard in the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies.
Okay, yeah.
And he's one of the guys in House of the Dragon.
Okay.
The new Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah.
He's a guy. Yeah. He's around.
He's been around.
Yeah.
But yeah,
he was very good. And another sympathetic, sane character needed to sort of ground Nyad. So yeah, I agree. All of those supporting performances, I think were essential to sort of tempering that. Yeah.
Yeah. I also will say that like the shark technology, the anti-shark technology that they used, really like I was actually like in suspense about that. The scene where it like breaks. I'm like, oh no, they got to get back in time, or otherwise they're going to be sharks. So it's not like I had a terrible time watching this movie. I just, there were certain things about it that bothered me. But
of course.
All right, should we move on to the killer?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you feel like there are going to be a lot of people who watch this movie and don't get it?
Yes.
Can we just like explain how we think we get it?
I mean, in a way, I think it ties in well with May Decembr. I won't try to include Nyad because that would be unfair. But in the same way that it was like May Decembr unlocks when you're like, oh, like Natalie Portman's not going to get, like Natalie Portman's character is not going to get a good performance out of this research. This is not going to result in an Academy Award winning movie within the world of the fictional of May Decembr. Similarly, this guy's not a good assassin. He's not a good hitman. And he pumps himself up with all of these sort of thoughts about how great he is. But like most of the time he's screwing something up and then trying to correct it. He's not always, but frequently is screwing things up. And there's a lot of, sort of him scrambling to fix the mistakes that he makes. And I think that part of the reason that there's a disconnect and maybe people are finding it boring is that they think that we should take at face value all of the things he's saying to himself, about his place in society. And if there's no deeper thing to that, if there's no sort of like, this guy's full of it, then that's pretty boring to listen to for 20 minutes while he's preparing to take a shot with a sniper rifle that he ultimately misses. Like, it's, you know, I think if you don't get on, again, like wavelength, if you don't get onto like, oh, okay, this is a critique of how good this guy can be and the system that exists around him, which we can discuss what maybe the system is entails and what it relates to. Some people say it's a critique of the gig economy, but that it's, you know, all of that stuff.
I told you that yesterday.
Well, you're right. You're not wrong. You are.
Okay, that's.
I mean, Jen, congratulations. You're some people. But yes, I thought that was true, but I didn't want to say that without confirming.
I mostly called you out because I wanted to play the music again, and that will be the last time I play it. I promise.
I think you shouldn't. I think you should break that promise. Play it again and then play it on yourself for breaking the promise. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So I think if you don't buy into that, you're not going to like it. That's why it's boring, is because it's all the miscues and the disconnect between his monologue and his reality are what make the movie interesting. And the moments of action and, you know, like frenetic movement within the picture are few and far between if you aren't interested in that dynamic. There's like the escape chase when he screws up the first assassination. There's the fight in the house, and that's kind of it in terms of action.
Yeah, but those action scenes are incredible.
They are.
Agreed.
They are so well done and so thrilling. And you know, I for my mom, she'd love a movie of just that, of just scenes like that. But
have you introduced her to a man named John Wick?
Yeah, no, she likes those movies a lot.
Okay.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, I on the other hand have not seen any of them, but you know, I like. When we were talking about it before, I did want to make clear that there's the action scenes that do exist in the film are very well done, and I alluded to the scene with like the Tilda Swinton, like, so the way that the movie is sort of structured, it's kind of inevitable what's going to happen, right? Like there's a quest that he sets out on, right? And as soon as we start seeing like where he is and what's happening and like and the screw up of the first thing, we sort of know where the movie has to end. There's an end point that's going to be whatever so the one moment that felt like unpredictable was this scene between two assassins, which I thought was just sort of incredible. And I could have seen an extended version of that. That was the opposite of boring to me. Her ordering more food, you know, and just like sitting here having their last meal or whatever, having that conversation, to me is the opposite of boring, right? Like, to me, that's even more thrilling than the action scenes and more worthy of our attention, I think, than even those. So I know that you agree with that scene, with that particular scene, and the assessment of that particular scene. But what else, Jen? What about you? About what you thought of what the movie meant and how it's playing with this genre?
So my Letterboxd review of this was, irony is the key to unlocking and appreciating this movie. And I feel like it's sort of echoing what PT said. Like, I think if you interpret the voiceover and the mantra of, you know, stick to the plan, anticipate, don't react, or whatever, right? That he goes through over and over again. If you interpret that as like he's just doing what he says, then yes, this is like, what is the point of him telling us that if we can watch it, right? But I think the most interesting points in this movie are the places where it's very specifically edited so that the second he says, you know, empathy is weakness, then he's doing something empathetic, right? Or like that he's snapping the neck of the woman so that her kids can collect insurance on her, as opposed to like burying her somewhere unknown, right? Or that like he has a very detailed, down to the second timeline of like, when I staple this man's chest, like his lungs will implode in this amount of time, and then he just dies before he even finishes the monologue. That actually was probably my favorite part, where I was like, this is hilarious. You know, and I have a slightly different take than PT in terms of what we're supposed to be getting out of that irony. for me, it was less about, oh, isn't he terrible at his job? And it was more about he approaches his profession under a false premise that he is able to control every element, right? And so to me, this movie is about how much of the world and life and our experience can we control, and how much of a sort of a farce trying to do so is, because it's sort of like he has everything. He's like, well, and in a lot of ways, making this movie, if you're going to do a movie about that theme, making it about a hitman is almost the perfect like vehicle for that, because we, from our history of cinema of like assassin movies, like we always associate it with like high precision, right? And that like everything is calculated. And actually that's what I think drew me originally to this movie. And I watched this with John, and that's his one of his favorite things, is like watching something where it's like someone's like picking apart, and it's like a puzzle box of like, here's how they planned this down the second, look how smart this character is, right? And I feel like, you know, that's it's sort of a bait and switch in that sense, right? Like we expect that, but we're getting a much more interesting but less kind of like glorified version of that. But it's like, yeah, as a hitman, you assume that as long as you plan everything down to the second and like have a backup plan and a backup plan for your backup plan, that you can control everything and orchestrate everything that you want, right? But then the movie constantly is showing us how that's a false idea, like that's never achievable really, and that there's always going to be something out of the control, right? There's no way to calculate, if you staple a man in the chest, how long he will live, because every person is and every human body is different, right? So that was kind of my takeaway, which is why I was sort of dissatisfied with the ending, because the ending largely he wins. Like it's like he's, and I didn't know what Fincher wanted us to think about his victory. Like, was it a sullied victory because he's just going to continue tragically to feel like he can control every aspect of his life, and he can't. But it sort of felt like a happy ending, right? He's reunited with his partner, and he took vengeance on what happened to her, and like he did it. And I feel like that's kind of counter to me. That was sort of counter to all the things we've just been talking about.
I agree. I mean, for a movie that sort of beats us on the head with the value of sort of like the professional value of detachment, what ultimately motivates our protagonist is the sort of most human of impulses, the most cinematic impulses, avenging like a wronged loved one. And for an unconventional sort of central character, for what drives him to be that sort of conventional to where he has this sort of ending. I mean, in as much as it's sort of like that did upend my expectations, right? I assumed that he would get to the end. He'd get to whatever the boss, the final boss is, right? Like in a video game, and then he would ultimately die, right? And then that's how. And it's also David Fincher. I was just like, that's probably how it's gonna end in darkness. So the fact it was surprising, but also unsatisfying, I think, for the reasons that you're talking about. I think, Jen, that at the end I wasn't quite sure what to make of like what the sort of central message is. And that's why it's sort of like, I think that's why a lot of people sort of revert to thinking of it, well, let's just not overthink it.
Right.
Like maybe it is just a genre film. Maybe it's like, it's just there for the thrills. I do think it's more than that. I agree with you. But I also agree that like the ending is kind of an interesting choice, but I didn't think elevated the movie or made me think about it anymore.
I don't know if it elevated, but I did think of the ending differently. I didn't really think it was a happy ending because I didn't think he was happy at the end. And I think that like it was that it's two things. Well, it's that like, you know, he has his initial mindset of like empathy is weakness, stick with the plan, I live on my own, blah, blah, blah. And he never attempts to reconcile that he has a house and a girlfriend or wife that he loves. Like that's he never like says, oh, I guess I have empathy for that. Or, oh, I guess I do have an attachment there. Like whatever. Like he just thinks he has this worldview. And then he's attacked. Then the network he's working with turns on him or whatever that system is. And he has to go and sort of root out all these people and he wipe them all out. And so he sort of has to admit, or he has to sort of see, he doesn't say it, but there's no way around the fact that he's abandoned his credo. He's abandoned all those sort of mantras he was telling himself. And then he was like, but I'll get, you know, on some level, he must be satisfied when he gets through, like you say, get to the final boss and wipe them out. But he's not like content. Like he's not happy. He's like, he's got the eye twitch that like he never had when he was prepping for things. He never had it when he's on the job. And I don't know if that's he needs to get back out to do the work because he loves doing the work, or if it's that now he's stuck without any of that support system, and whatever this is that he has at home that we've never really seen, and beyond it in angering him when it's threatened, there's no sort of emotion or feeling. All this time we spent in his head, he's never been like, and I just love my downtime, I can't wait to just sip iced tea by the pool where I live. So I didn't think he won. I didn't think he was happy. I thought that he was just stuck in this new reality where everything that he had told himself in the past, he had to admit wasn't true.
Yeah, you're right. Like in the earlier scenes, you almost get a sense that it's therapeutic for him. There's a reason they show him doing a lot of yoga, because I feel like to him it's like meditative, like him, this constant process of like setting all the stuff up and waiting, and that there's sort of like a weird mindfulness to his profession. Not that I'm recommending people take on this profession. But yeah, I think that helps. And I guess maybe I didn't notice the eye twitch enough, because you're right. Like now that you say that, I remember seeing that. But yeah, I feel like it felt like plot closure, but not thematic closure to me, is maybe the best way to put it. But to go back to I wasn't bothered by his choice to not kill the guy. And I actually think that's, you mentioned, we were joking about it when you mentioned that like some people have this theory about it being about the gig economy. That actually is not my theory either, but I'm just saying like I have listened to podcasts and read a bunch about it, and then told you yesterday, and then you mentioned it, and that's why it was funny.
And then I took it from you.
And then you stole it.
I felt great about it.
But I feel like there's this whole other movie Fincher wants to make that's more like Fight Club, that's like anti-capitalist and sort of like so the theory is, and I heard it multiple places, I think the main one probably was either Big Picture, Filmcast, like my usual rounds, like more than one critic sort of like talked about it in this context of like the prominence of all of these automated services and like there are Amazon boxes, there's Postmates, right? And that it's like the gig economy, that he's a member of the gig economy or a contributor to it, and that like that's what allows him to do his job, right? That because there's no human interaction, and it's all these abstracted transactions that can happen automatically, and that because he has this line where he's like, why do I need to get past security when I can have when I have Postmates, right? And so that's how he gets into the building at the end. But I feel like the ultimate choice for him when he recognizes, because this guy is sort of like a Jeff Bezos sort of figure, I can't kill him because that's going to create too many problems for me. And I recognize his privilege in this instance. I don't like it, but I recognize it. I'm going to kind of abide by it. And that to me is like the reason that if you're following along with sort of the gig economy stuff in the movie, that's the ultimate payoff of that, right? To be like, isn't it tragic that like capitalism makes it so that this is the one guy that survives, right? When arguably it's his fault that this all happened to begin with. Right.
I do want to sort of in thinking of the three movies together and to build up to one point, but the issue of these being on Netflix and the issue of people just sort of scrolling around and just being like, I see a thumbnail and the first like sentence or first two lines of a description, and it's like David Fincher and Mike, directed movie, Michael Fassbender's a hitman. You're like, okay, like great, and you'll watch it. Like, maybe this isn't going to be what people expect if they think it's going to be again a Fight Club, or even if it's going to be like a Zodiac, where it's the sort of very like procedural, and it kind of starts feeling like that, but it veers off in this different direction. Similarly, May Decembr is sort of like, it's Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore as an actress researching for a role. You're like, okay, sure. And I think that if you don't know the backstory of what the role is and what the history of Julianne Moore's character, which I think is in the full description, but you might not see it when you're just kind of scrolling. Like that, when that reveals itself in the same way that the pacing of The Killer and the monologue of The Killer, I can see a lot of people tuning out after 20 minutes in a way that I don't think they would with Nyad, because Nyad does what it says on the box. But thinking all of that is to say that like I hope that people do stick with The Killer, and if they're listening at this point, they have, because that last 15-20 minutes when Tilda Swinton shows up is incredible. And I just want to reiterate what both of you have said, elevates the movie. Like where I was kind of like, this is maybe only okay. Like it's got some good moments, but like, I don't know. And then Tilda Swinton shows up and of course is throwing 96 on the corners and just being like, bam, 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 like doing amazing stuff and creating a dynamic and a scene that is, I agree with Antonio, is more exciting, is more thrilling than the thrilling chases and fights. But you need to have gone all the way through the movie and presumably be on board at least a little bit to have stayed that long to get there and to appreciate it. So I hope folks do push through.
Why does that scene elevate the whole movie, or what role does that scene play in the larger film, do you think?
I mean, Tilda Swinton rocks. I don't know.
I know, but like I mean, why is her character in the movie? Why is her character a part of this like fancy food club? Why is she ordering whiskey flights? Why does she have her own bottle? You know what I mean? Like, why is she there?
So with regard to Michael Fassbender's character, you know, you're sort of at the beginning with his internal monologue and the way that he's approaching his job, there's a kind of joylessness about it, right? Like it's the sort of the tedium of his work, even when the work is sort of murdering people, right? And Tilda Swinton shows up, and this is a person who absolutely loves her job, who absolutely loves her life, right? And who's chosen the same profession, but it hasn't eaten away at her intellect, at her ability to like enjoy life. You know, you sense that like the people in that restaurant cater to her. They believe that she's a person of like refined taste. And you believe that she's a person of refined taste. She looks fantastic. Right. And so, you know, to see two people in the same profession. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I always imagine like in my head, when I imagine an assassin, it's probably closer to what Michael Fassbender is like, just someone who's just that sort of like focused on the job and that's what it is. And just like this sort of depravity and like just not caring about it much.
Right.
Although we find out that he does care about, you know, about something very, very much.
But he'd like to think that he doesn't.
Exactly. But Tilda Swinton, you feel like she's an assassin who hasn't had to tell lies about herself or about what she does, that she's been able to live, I imagine, a kind of a rich life. She just has an unusual job that she's also very good at. Right. And then
her version of this movie would not be ironic, right? Her voiceover would match because she doesn't have that kind of like self-denial.
Right. Yeah.
Michael Fassbender has the wellness routine, but she has the work-life balance.
There you go. I love it. You should be leading the next like Hitman Anonymous, or like the next HR seminar for
the next annual training.
Yeah.
Now that Charles Parnell is out of the picture, someone has to be the HR head for this entity. I also think that I think that contrast is key. What Antonio was saying of like, you know, she puts she's the final piece that puts all the lies that Michael Fassbender tells himself to bed. Like of just like, no, that's not the life that you have to lead. That's not how you need to do this job. Like you could totally do it differently. And you know, he sort of sees it, unclear how much he takes it in. But then there's also the gamesmanship of her trying to work the angles of how do I get out of this? Like this person is here to kill me. I'm not even mad. Like, I get it. I get why he's doing that. But like, I just need to like find, how do I get an opening? How do I get an edge? And it's all dialogue. It's all conversation until, you know, again, that very sort of last moment when she does the gambit of the slip on the ice, on the steps. That's her move to try to get him close to stab him. But that's great. And that's the tension of that is really good. And I think there's a lot of classic Fincher there of letting the dialogue and let these two great actors just sort of bounce off each other.
That scene is almost a window into an entirely different movie. You know what I mean? Like, because on the one hand, it's a very like, I think it's thrilling intense because it's like the spy versus spy kind of tension, right? Because of all the things that PT just said. But I also feel like that scene is the closest we get to John Wick. and Antonio, you really got to watch those movies. They're great. Keanu Reeves,
all right.
amazing. But the John Wick series, the universe of the John Wick has this sort of like, just because we're killers, that doesn't mean that we aren't civilized, right? Or that we don't get to enjoy the nicer, finer things in life or whatever, right? And I feel like she could very easily have been like in the Continental.
Agreed.
But yeah. All right. So now we're going to talk about the Oscar prospects of these movies. All right. So do any of these movies have Oscar prospects? If so, in which categories? Like, I guess we can go from most likely contender to least likely, or jump around, whichever you want to do.
I think May Decembr is the most likely contender. I think I could see it for supporting actor. I could see it for supporting actress, for actress, and screenplay. I think Nyad is possible for actress and supporting actress. Killer, in an ideal world, supporting actress for Tilda Swinton, but I don't actually think The Killer is a contender. But
when we do our own award show, we can.
Oh yeah, I would love to do that. I would absolutely. I have my list of like what I would nominate. So absolutely, let's do it.
Yeah, PT was already pushing that agenda, so we can definitely.
We're trying to figure out: is it the takeys, the longies? What is the?
All of them sound bad. I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't sound good. I don't know. The letters. If it's LTR, that looks like letter. So the letters.
Okay, maybe.
I don't know.
That would fit with we're writing professors, right?
That's
like
true.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll workshop it at another time. But yeah, so the ones you listed for May Decembr, Antonio, that's actually quite a lot. So
I don't think it's gonna get that much. I just think
if it gets all of that, it has to be in Best Picture almost. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it could get into Best Picture even without those. If, like Jen was saying earlier, now that it's out and it's getting more of a positive reaction than people expected when it was at Cannes and at other festivals. That's not how you say Cannes. I don't know. I always get scared about how to pronounce.
I always say Cannes because other people say Cannes. Oh, also a thing I learned. This is totally irrelevant. I'm sorry. It's not Divine Joy Randolph. It's Davine. Like that. We've been pronouncing it incorrectly.
Oh,
okay. It's not like divine, like the word divine. It's So we gotta get on that.
Noted. Yeah, that's good to know. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's possible this has some more momentum. I feel like there's just a lot of like we were saying earlier, there's a lot of good movies that are out there, and I think the top half of Best Picture is pretty locked in, but they're like 10 or 11 for those last 5 spots.
Yeah.
And this could very easily be one of those movies if it gets momentum. I do think it's possible if it does start to gain more recognition, it's going to hit the backlash of, for lack of a better term, normies, turning it on and just being like, what is happening? Like, what is going on in this movie? But, I could see it there. I think it's right. I think that right now, Best Supporting Actor is the most, I think original screenplay is its most lock. Like, I think it's there for that. I would be very surprised if it didn't get that. I think supporting actor is close to a lock. That's a lot of people.
The screenwriter, this is their. Sorry, the screenwriter is Sammy Birch. This is her first screenplay.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
She was a casting director before this.
That's sickening. So amazing.
Yeah, that's
very clear that she's worked with a lot of actors that are like this.
Yeah, but still incredible.
And also gets to. I don't know to what degree Todd Field works. Doesn't Todd Field usually write?
Todd Haynes.
Yeah, this is not Tar. Although I feel like Oscars wise, I feel like this might go the way of Tar.
Oh no.
That's the worst case scenario. That's the worst case scenario, right?
That's a bummer. For his first 5 or 6 movies, he did write as well. So I do think of him as having a hand
as a writer director,
in the writing. But yeah, that's incredible. I didn't realize this was her first movie. So yeah, I mean, I think May Decembr is a player in the way that these other 2 movies, it's not as likely. I think they, Nyad's got those acting possibilities, and maybe there's some outside weird rando like not even. I don't think we get cinematography or anything like that. But maybe there's some below the line thing that it could try to do. But if we're looking at these together because they're all on Netflix. Netflix, usually ends up choosing a couple of movies to really put their energies into. Presumably, Maestro is going to be one of those because that's that's got momentum. That's got people who are in favor of it. I feel like May December would be their second place movie over these two, over Rustin, which is we didn't include in this. That's another one that's out.
They've misjudged what's going to get them awards in the past. Like, just remember last year, All Quiet on the Western Front. They had no clue.
Yeah.
They were not plugging that movie at all as an awards contender. And then all of a sudden, when they're like, wait a minute, people like this movie? Oh, okay. Like, yes, of course. We planned this for an Oscars campaign the whole time. Right. And then it won a bunch of stuff. So it could shift at any point in the season in terms of what they throw their way. But I do think, people are very positive about Maestro. It hasn't come out yet. Usually that means that they know they've got something good when they're waiting for that optimal winter release, right? To time it perfectly before Oscar nomination. So, and like now that Bradley Cooper's out there and like doing his thing, right? I feel like Maestro. You're right. Maestro could be the thing that gets in the way of May December really having a big impact, but you never know. I think so. Here's my thing. I think I like the screenplay idea. I think there's space in there. I do think the acting categories are going to be rough. I think Charles Melton, just because of how strong he's been so far this season, gets in. I'm much less confident about Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore. Just because, think about Best Actress. Best Actress is a slugfest this year.
Yeah.
Like, because we got Lily Gladstone, Carey Mulligan. I don't even know if Annette Benning makes it in at this point, right? And then, and
Emma Stone.
Emma Stone, right? There's a lot of heavy hitters that are already kind of like firmly ensconced in the category. And so it's just going to come down to that fifth spot. Who gets that fifth spot, right? I would love to see it. I think if all three of them, because it is such a three-hander of a movie, I think that would be great. But I feel like if I were being more conservative, I would say screenplay, Melton, and then maybe Best Picture. I feel like it could have it could be like the Women Talking of this year, where it just confusingly squeaks into Best Picture.
Right, everyone writes it off by like mid-January, and then suddenly it's there.
Yeah,
I can see that. But I think no one would be, or again, depending on who gets left out, it's like, well, Natalie Portman, Julianne Moore getting nominated would be great. Either one of them, or both of them would be like they were really good in this. And I would be in favor. Again, I haven't made my list. I should do it like Antonio does and just keep updating it. But like in my mind, I'm like, of course, I would put Jodie Foster as one of the best supporting actress nominations in my world because I thought she was incredible. And Annette Benning is great. We have on our agenda talking about Annette Benning, like a little. If Glenn Close had won, when what was it for The Wife? Or instead of Olivia Colman, if Glenn Close had won, we would be talking about Annette Benning as the like person who keeps getting nominated and not winning. But Glenn Close still has that title, so we talk about Glenn Close. But yeah, Annette Benning.
Is this now or never, or is she ever going to get an Oscar? What's going on?
It's not now or never, but
Yeah. She's been nominated recently. Like Kids Are All Right. Like it's just and then there was that other movie that she did with Greta Gerwig. I forgot the name of it. That was also really excellent. Greta Gerwig was acting in it. She didn't direct it, but 20th Century Women. She was excellent in that.
Yes, but not nominated for it, which is
not nominated for it. But she absolutely should have been. But she's getting roles, right? Like she's like a lot of actresses complain that like Meryl Streep gets all the roles, but Annette Bening gets a lot of these roles too, right? So I feel like we have I don't think that this is her Oscar. She might get a nomination, but this isn't where she's going to win. But I hope that there's going to be a role somewhere down the line for her because I do think she's one of our best screen actresses.
I will say, while Meryl Streep is not stealing her roles, Meryl Streep stole her nomination for 20th Century Women because that's when Meryl Streep was nominated for Florence Foster Jenkins.
Oh yeah,
no one was excited about that nomination.
No,
and
I love
Annette Bening was the person who should have gotten in.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah.
A big question I had about May December was how Academy friendly is it? Because we've already talked about in general, like considering the nature of the story and the content, and then also the tone, how it's really melodramatic, like, is the Academy going to go for it, or are they going to think it's too weird?
I think that actors like actors, right? And it's the Academy is mostly made up of actors, and the fact that it's playing with acting in this way, they're gonna eat it up. And I think that there's enough respect for Todd Haynes as a director and as and he's not writing this, but I think writers will respect him from his body of work, where I think that there could be enough broad support for the film to where I think it could be fairly Academy friendly.
I think the bigger issue, if there is an issue, isn't that it's weird, because like the ways in which it's weird the Academy would respond to. I think it's because it is ultimately kind of critical of acting and movie making and storytelling in a way that maybe they'll be like, I don't like this. I do like acting and I don't like what you're saying. But I think it's much more likely that they would see people they know, even if like, well, I'm not like that, but I totally know actors that do that. And I know, how like all this sort of happens, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think it'll be a turnoff. I do not look forward to the discourse if this becomes, gets any sort of momentum for it's going to win awards of like movie that celebrates pedophilia is, dominating Hollywood. Hollywood loves it. So I don't look forward to that if it happens, but I think that, that's not going to stop. They'd be more likely to dig in and be like, well, we will nominate it, or I will vote for it in the steps of the process.
My theory right now is that wouldn't it be the most actory thing for them to vote for this movie, because they're like, see, we get it. We like, as like a humbling kind of thing. Like we understand, like, aren't we so narcissistic, we actors, right? Like, wouldn't that be like the best? It kind of has the feel of the, back in the day, less so now, but back in the day, movies about Hollywood were always really popular with the Oscars. I feel like this is a similar thing where it's like, since it's about, even if it's critical, the vote for it would sort of be like a virtue signaling of like, we understand what some of the problems with acting are.
Agreed.
But, yeah.
Do either of you think The Killer has anything?
No.
I don't think so. Back when we were doing I can't remember now. Was it Thanksgiving episode where we talked about this? Because we did mention it in the Thanksgiving episode, but I can't remember if we talked about Oscars prospects. I feel like there was a time when it first came out that it could have gotten like a craft of some kind, like maybe like a sound nomination.
I think score has a possibility because it's Reznor and Ross.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
but I don't know if anyone's talking about it. Like, I don't know if it has. That's the thing.
It's faded so much from the conversation that I feel like unless something else happens and it comes back.
I also think their Ninja Turtles score was better, so I would rather they get nominated for that because it was the same guys did that movie. But,
they usually get nominated for something.
I mean, they're great.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I feel like May Decembr is really teetering. Like it could either blow up in the next few weeks, or could sort of fade into obscurity. It depends. It depends which of these smaller movies fights it out for the one or two spots in Best Picture.
I really wanted to continue my anti-Maestro talk by predicting that May Decembr would be more successful at the Oscars than Maestro, but I feel like the talk has shifted so positively towards Maestro. I can't.
I mean, we haven't seen Maestro yet, but based on the trailers, I feel like May Decembr is kind of gunning for Maestro. You know what I mean? Like those two movies in dialogue with each other. I feel like
that's interesting. That's a good point.
You could see one as a critique of the other. But again, that's having not seen it and only basing it on the trailers for Maestro. I actually heard Maestro is quite good, so
yes,
I want to be wrong.
I will note, and this affects Antonio more than Jen. It is out in theaters right now in Pasadena, and a few other places. Maestro is playing, which I didn't realize that it was playing now in the theaters because it comes to Netflix the 20th, something like that.
I think so. It's close to Christmas,
right before Christmas.
Yeah, I think I might see it. Maybe tomorrow. We'll see. All my grading.
There are too many movies. This is it's both wonderful time of the year and a very stressful time of the year.
Spoken like a man that doesn't have a committee meeting at 2:00 on Friday afternoon.
Yep.
Sounds great for you.
All right. We're starting to talk about work, which means that we should wrap it up. Antonio, you're notoriously not on the grid.
Jen, I know that you're tired of saying that about me, so I joined something. I asked my students what should I do so that Jen doesn't have to preface it always with this. So you can find me on OnlyFans. No, I'm kidding. You can find me Letterboxd. I now have a Letterboxd. Elefano. Yeah. Join me because I have like 2 friends on it. Elefano.
I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, please do.
I don't care. We're recording an episode. I can do this.
PT, what about you? Where can we find you?
Well, right now you could literally find me on Letterboxd following you, because I got to make sure I do that. And I did, I'm on Letterboxd, PT McNiff, all one, whatever phrase. I don't use it enough, but I was thinking how I think starting at New Year's, like I'm going to actually, instead of doing what I normally do, which is keep track of all the movies I watch in a note file on my on my phone that links to my computer, that I will use Letterboxd. So that way, like I will have something more to say when we come around to this part of recording a show. And again, to reiterate, if you want to follow the show itself on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, and you're welcome to send us an email if you'd like to communicate with us, not through the Meta Corporation. Email us, thelongtakereview@gmail.com is the address.
You can find me at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI on Instagram and Threads, and Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd. I'm so happy Antonio has joined Letterboxd. This is great. I feel like this is the perfect. I don't know why I didn't think of this. This is the perfect social media engagement for you. Like it's perfect. Yeah. Perfect fit.
Although I will note, apparently your 4 favorite movies are the last 4 movies you've seen. So it seems like you've real short-term.
He just joined. Give him some time.
But it's just funny. The recent activity and the favorite movies are the same.
Yeah,
because that's how it works when you set something up.
I engage with Letterboxd a lot more once I let go of the idea that reviews on there have to be like polished and refined. Because because most people, the people who with the most popular reviews on Letterboxd are the ones who like make jokes about the movies.
It's a quip, yes.
Yeah, so it's like you could just write like, and Greg's really good at this, like just a quick one-liner about your movie and that or your experience, and then send. Like it's
okay. I feel like it should be thought of less like your Substack, where you're like putting out a considered review, which some people do on Letterboxd, and those are great to read sometimes. But it's more like you're telling your friends, hey, I saw this movie. This is my like quick immediate reaction to it. That's not a considered intellectual exercise.
All right. Well, thank you both. I can't believe in the length of a normal episode, we managed to cover 3 movies. I was wondering how that was going to go. So thank you both. And we'll see everybody on Netflix.
That's great.
Netflix and chill.
Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.